The media, consumed as always with covering Donald Trump, had looked rather bored with the whole Clinton Foundation mess, but that slowly began to change this week, especially with the report by the Associated Press that at least 85 of the 154 private people that Secretary Clinton met with or had scheduled calls with had donated to her family foundation or pledged money to its global programs. And the coverage got a boost when Trump ratcheted up his attacks.
Hillary Clinton ran the State Department like a failed leader in a third world country. That's what it's run. It's run like a third world country. She sold favors and access in exchange for cash.
Clinton's campaign manager responded by calling the AP report distorted and biased.
There were over 1,700 other meetings that she had. You know, she was Secretary of State. She was meeting with foreign officials and government officials constantly. So to pull all of them out of the equation, cherry pick a very small number of meetings is pretty outrageous.
Joining us now to analyze the coverage of this controversy and the increasingly white-hot rhetoric on immigration and racism, Kelly Riddell, Deputy Opinion Editor of The Washington Times, Joe Trippi, a Democratic strategist and Fox News contributor, and Susan Ferricchio, Chief Congressional Correspondent for The Washington Examiner. Kelly, the media had come to consider the Clinton Foundation story to be kind of old and eye-glazing, but with these latest revelations, is it now getting the attention it deserves? Yes,
and it deserved more attention throughout this campaign season. The Media Research Center did a study that from January to May, the Clinton Foundation as a whole got 5 minutes of coverage on CBS, NBC, and ABC. Donald Trump got 8 times that much. By a stupid, like the PR scandal where he posed as his own PR man, that got 8 times as much coverage as the Clinton Foundation in the first half of this campaign season. That just shows you how biased the press is. And there's a lot to uncover here. And you know how it's being uncovered? By Citizens United and by Judicial Watch through lawsuits, not by the New York Times and not by the Washington Post and investigative journalists. The AP was the exception this week, but there's a lot more that can be dug into and uncovered here, and the press just isn't doing it.
Joe, you're an honest Democrat, so I know you're going to acknowledge that this is a troubling news story for the Clinton campaign and that the press should be aggressively covering it.
Look, it is what it is. You wonder sometimes why they didn't get in front of some of this. They've known it was coming for quite a while. On the other hand, the coverage has been, I think, like very simplistic, not really explaining a whole lot. And looking at, and I do think
simplistic in a misleading way, in your view?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no the calls for shutting down the foundation.
Yeah.
Shut it down right now. This is a foundation that provides 11 million of the 17 million people get AIDS drugs come from the Clinton Foundation. They receive. So how do you shut that down like tomorrow?
Okay.
In other words, there's things like that I think are being lost in the why don't they shut it down right now? I mean, those kinds of questions.
Okay. Well, nobody is disputing that the Clinton Foundation has done good work over the years, but the questions are about the ties between the Hillary Clinton State Department and the foundation and her potential presidency. So, Susan, Boston Globe editorial last week and the uber-liberal Huffington Post said shut it down. This week you've had USA Today and LA Times, some of which say, you know, it should be gradually transferred to another foundation. And these aren't right-wing opponents of Hillary Clinton.
Well, it looks terrible. I mean, this is an unparalleled situation where you have someone, former Secretary of State, she's running for president, she's leading in the polls, with this sort of parallel universe of a big foundation that takes in billions of dollars from foreign countries. It's so unusual.
With Kelly saying that there should be more coverage by the media,
well,
and when Joe's saying the coverage is simplistic, where do you come down?
Part of the reason why there hasn't been a lot of coverage is the secrecy. Look how hard it was for AP to get these emails. 6 years. 6 years they've been asking for her schedule.
But where was the where's the press's coverage of the Points of Light Foundation when George H. Herbert Walker Bush was running that foundation during the same time his son was running for president and serving as president and receiving contributions from people who probably wanted things from the Bush administration? Now, I agree. Part of the reason this is happening is because Citizens United and Judicial Watch sued and are pushing this. There was no such, there was no such coverage of the Points of Light, which I think was a good foundation, and still is a good foundation.
Well, I mean, Hillary Clinton was serving as Secretary of State while her husband was going out and getting paid speeches from foreign governments that were looking for deals that needed to be approved by the Secretary of State, Uranium One being one of them.
Okay, let's drill down a little bit on this AP story that the Clinton campaign says is totally off. So in this figure about 85 out of 154 private people, the Clinton campaign says, among other things, well, probably Secretary Clinton would have met with some of these folks anyway, like Melinda Gates. That's probably true, but the campaign, in my view, has not really knocked down any of the facts.
No, and I think the AP story was very fair. It said that this wasn't a complete, we don't know who all she met with because her schedules haven't been released yet. We're still, and then the State Department comes out and says, we're not going to give you her full calendar or agenda until after the election season. So we're not going to know the complete story. But the AP was right, and they said that these are the calendars that we got. These are the evaluations that we've made off of this. And they just looked at special interest groups. They didn't look at, you know, traditional business.
Right.
They looked at special
Let me
interest
jump in
groups.
on that, Joe, and you can respond. So the AP did one thing wrong, which was failing to retract an erroneous tweet summarizing the story. But the reason that the coverage here, that the AP story only covers half of Hillary Clinton's tenure, is because AP had only access to 2 years of calendars, which it had to sue the State Department for, and that is all in the story. Yeah. So that doesn't make it inaccurate, in my view.
No, but they didn't go, well, one, they really did make a big mistake with that tweet, and they still haven't retracted it. That thing was like, I still don't get that. I mean, why would a news organization not retract that tweet? The second thing is, it's true that what you're saying about them having to fight for that information, I get that. I agree with that. I think that was a mistake on the Clinton campaign.
The Clinton campaign says, well, the 1,700 other meetings that the Secretary held with foreign and domestic government officials weren't counted. The AP addresses it and says we didn't count that because that's her job.
It's more important to look at her elective schedule where she has a choice. So she has more of a choice with these outside groups than when the officialdom of the State Department, which is the part of the calendar the AP didn't look at. So they looked at, when she had a choice, who did she choose to meet with and why? And you look at it, and among those, she received $156 million of the Clinton Foundation.
Well, the foundation received, yeah.
And her husband received a lot of money in speaking fees.
Speaking fees, correct.
That's important.
Let me turn now to the increasingly hot rhetoric on the question of race by both candidates. Here's a brief look at the speeches that they gave this week.
Hillary Clinton is a bigot who sees people of color only as votes, not as human beings worthy of a better future.
Now, of course, there's always been a paranoid fringe in our politics, a lot of it arising from racial resentment, but it's never had the nominee of a major party stoking it, encouraging it, and giving it a national megaphone until now.
For both of you, Kelly first, how do the media cover this? It seems like we're all being sucked into this vortex of ugliness and really incendiary charges. You're a racist, you're a bigot. How do the media cover this?
I think they actually have to look at Trump supporters. I give props to the Washington Post today, which on its editorial page actually went to a Trump rally and interviewed some of his supporters who are not this alt-right fringe of racist, you know, bigots, and they are actually people that are concerned about the future of America. 70% of them don't think that they're on the right track, and that's the reason why they support Trump. So the press should look into actually who is Trump's base and not give Hillary Clinton a lot of headlines calling them all racists and bigots, which is just simply not true. And on the same token, if they're going to do that, do it with her alt-left supporters.
She didn't call her supporters racist at all. She said that he was stoking racist and bigotry. And by the way, a lot of reporting of polls suggests that 56 or even higher % of the American people believe that about Trump.
So it's up to us as journalists to actually report the truth. And the reason why people in the polls think that is because a lot of this reporting that's come out paints his supporters in this mischaracterization.
Look, I think, the coverage of Trump for 15 months, that the press has covered his words, I think have left a lot of Americans with that impression. And I think what the Clinton campaign is doing is continuing to remind people as much as they can about that.
There's a lot of
so that's politics, but the coverage isn't.
There's a lot of
plain.
context here. So, for example, when Donald Trump says Hillary Clinton's a bigot, he's talking about policies, actually.
Right.
He doesn't care about African Americans, just cares about their votes. The policies haven't worked. And when Clinton says Trump is supported by a radical fringe of white supremacists, we can get into that. But doesn't all that, no matter what we try to do, get lost amid the sound bites and the headlines and the finger pointing?
No, absolutely, because everyone hears him call her a bigot, and they're like, what is he talking about? It's hard to, read into that. What he's doing is countering a long-time narrative that the Democrats make claims to be the ones who are helping minorities, whereas the Republicans are not. So he's trying to counter that whole argument by saying the Democratic policies have not helped minorities. And the way he interprets that with his campaign followers is saying that they're, bigots.
We'll have more on this later in the program. I got to get a break.